You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo.
All right, welcome into the Locked On Nets and Locked On Cavs podcast, a crossover episode where, of course, we thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We're free on all those great platforms and let you know that today's episode is going to be brought to you by Prize Picks. It is, of course, prizepicks.com, where you can use promo code NBA or go to the App Store and download the app today. Prize Picks, it makes daily fantasy easy. And as we welcome in not only myself, Adam Armbrecht, you know where you can find me covering the Giants. You know Doug Norrie's over there doing DFSR for all your daily fantasy sports ranking needs. We also have, though, co-hosting. We're all together on this. One Evan Dammarell, and, of course, Chris Manning from the Locked On Cavs podcast. Hello, fellas. We come in together because we ended up in the same exact spot, the delicious play-in game.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe some different energies coming in from both of these teams. I think certainly certain different fear factors for the teams above them in the East, let's say, just considering who plays them. No shade to the very players in the Cavs, but I'm sure the Boston Celtics are perhaps rooting for the Cleveland Cavaliers to win in Brooklyn, so they don't have to play Kevin Durant in round one. But yeah, this is going to be a good time.
Chris, I don't know about that. One of our listeners in our Discord server said that they'd rather play Miami than Boston because of the lack of Bam Adebayo, and then several users came in hot saying that they'd rather play Boston because they think if Jared Allen came back, they could shred apart Boston on the interior of Time Lord out there. Who knows? Okay, I like delicious though. It's a good way to describe it.
But here's the thing: how many of those people have actually watched the Boston Celtics since they became like the '96 Bulls?
Listen, all of our dedicated listeners are some of the most educated Cavs fans in the sphere. Love them.
The way you're using your hand
5
is
stars,
very concerning to me, just so you know.
And it means a lot. But yeah, we fight like an old married couple. How are you guys doing?
We do the same, so this is gonna be a good vibe. we could do a sort of a host swap, and then you can follow the cameras around to see if everyone treated each other the same way. Because I got the vibe off camera, I was like, these guys have a very Adam and Doug vibe to them that I'm just not gonna probably put on display now, but I'm feeling it.
Spent 8 hours with Evan yesterday. It was a long time with.
It was a good 8 hours though. We had so much fun. I didn't even think about how long we spent together.
It's about team building. They call that team building exercise. Trust falls. I'm sure we're involved as well.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. But as you said, different energy coming into this. So it felt like this is the jumping off point of the Brooklyn Nets have had their tumultuous season. No shortage of interesting narratives and potentials for things to be going well or horrible for them. But for the Cleveland Cavaliers, how does it feel to be at this point now where you're in the play-in game, which I think unto itself, if you said at the start of the year, you'll be in the 7th or 8th seed looking to make the playoffs, you might have felt good about that, or you might have felt like, hey, they could be playing for a lot heading towards the playoffs. And yet, because of the timeline of some of the injuries, because of the bad run of losses at the back end of the season here, does it feel like the Cavs are missing out on a big opportunity for themselves this season, or just that maybe they came back to what was going to be their ultimate goal? The Knicks come to mind here the year prior, where they really outshined maybe where they could have been in the playoff bracket, and then the following season came down to earth a little bit and now are going to completely miss the scene.
Chuck, do you want to tackle this one, or do you want me to go with it?
Yeah, I can go first. I think the Knicks thing is an interesting point of comparison because the Knicks obviously kind of overachieved. Mm-hmm. And I think to some degree the Cavs have achieved more than we expected this year. They were like 26 and a half.
Overachieving, but okay.
You put that line, Evan. Throw in that line. I think the difference is that you would look at this team and I think you look at how good Evan Mobley is. I don't feel like Evan Mobley is going to have like the Julius Randle regression. I don't think Jared Allen, who you guys know very well, once his hand is healthy, he'll also big video game nerd Jared Allen. You should probably not going to regress next year. Darius Garland, I don't think is going to regress. There is some roster construction that has to be done that will be interesting, let's say, in terms of how they approach it in the summer. What I think would be the missed opportunities, I think this is a group that, because they haven't won anything yet, they haven't really done anything. They've been bad. Darius Garland has played for bad teams. Evan Mobley just got here. Jared Allen, was on those Kenny Atkinson net teams, but hasn't accomplished anything in Cleveland yet. Even guys on the sideline, Colin Sexton's not going to get to play, but like he has not been on a winning Cavs team yet. I think those guys just getting to a 7-game series would do them some good, just to go through that. Even if they get beat up by the Celtics or beat up by the Heat, that would probably be good for them. And I think if they ultimately like can't navigate this play-in tournament due to injuries, due to like the level of play isn't high enough, whatever, like I think that will be a missed opportunity for them.
And so that's the bad luck, Evan, of just this draw of where you find yourself now, because what are the chances that Brooklyn is the team that's in the 7th seed when you go to the play-in?
Yeah, I mean, that in itself is unfortunate if you are just looking through the lens of it's disappointing that injuries and late season losses and meltdowns have kind of been a part of this gradual decline for the Cavs, even a little bit before the All-Star break and especially after the All-Star break. I think drawing the Nets, no matter how you shake it, just with KD and Kyrie alone, and that's just going to be a hard ask of this team to kind of gut up and handle them, especially after the Cavs looked pretty competitive when they played the Nets last Friday, but then the Nets just kind of showed the difference between where Cleveland's at and where they're at just in terms of superstar talent, because KD can flip a switch and just kill them. So I think that's disappointing in itself, but having 2 bites of the apple to get to the playoffs is definitely beneficial for them. But I also look at it as this way. This is the peak optimal outcome for the Cavs, because Chris and I were incredibly low on them coming into the season. I think most people were. When we did the Locked On crossover talking about contenders, everyone just kept asking me questions like, I think they're just happy to be considered part of this group. I looked like a small fish in a very, very big ocean out there. So I think getting this experience is beneficial for their growth long term. I think the Knicks comparison is an interesting one. There's also comparisons to the Hawks as well, who made the Eastern Conference Finals. Just off a lot of youth and talent. But I agree with Chris. I just don't think there's going to be any serious regression on both sides or any part of the Cavaliers. Maybe just in terms of offense with JV Bickerstaff, things kind of plateau a little bit. But I'm interested to see what they do long term. But yeah, drawing the Nets is a pretty tough ask. But I think having 2 bites of the apple kind of gives me a little bit of reassurance.
And Doug, as you say, for the Brooklyn Nets, same kind of mantra, right? Just good to get experience. You'd like to get to a 7-game series, obviously, for the reps for some of these guys. Kevin Durant could certainly use some of that taste. What contextualize for the crossover purposes around the Brooklyn Nets season, because I think the Cavs have had an interesting one, but it's almost untimely injuries have created a bit of a downfall for them. Brooklyn has had no shortage of interesting elements to derail them.
Yeah, look, everyone knows the story at this point. Some of it's injury, some of it's self-inflicted. Like, this is just the story of the Nets season. The fact that they're in the 7th seed, we're all, and at least on the Nets side of it, are pretty well versed into like sort of the how we got here. It's really kind of what happens now is becomes the instructive sort of question. And I think in some ways, I don't think it's funny. The trajectories are still different because the Nets are on a championship trajectory, and I'm not sure the Cavs really are right in this exact moment, and maybe not even like next year. But we still have as many questions as like, we still have as many questions of like fit, rotations, who can play, who can't. Like, there's the season is, the question marks have not decreased really. They just are kind of different than they were 6 months ago or 4 months ago or even 2 months ago. And so with the Nets, it still remains very difficult to evaluate what even the hope should be. I mean, the hope in this game against the Cavs clearly should be a W, right? Like, they're heavy favorites here. Like, I don't think that part is not in question. But really the long-term or rest of season hope, I do still find myself struggling to like realistically, what should I realistically hope for here? I mean, obviously the easy answer is championship, but like looking at this team, it's still hard to feel super confident about that. So I think the Nets would still walk into this playing game with a different set of questions. It's just, but it doesn't make it any easier necessarily to evaluate like sort of what happens in this game and then even what happens in the next series going forward, and like what the Nets should kind of hope to have happen.
Can I offer you guys a little bit of reassurance, though? It wouldn't be the first time Andre Drummond has kept the Cavs out of the playoffs.
Wow. This freaking guy, man.
Listen, man, ever since he flashed the peace sign for the Nets, I am all the way back in on admiring him from a distance, but hating having him on my team.
We recently talked about Drummond and saying that it's like if he was 15 pounds lighter, because his athleticism is so good, you almost don't see it because it's packaged inside of this big oversized teddy bear, physique that he has. And then he does things like flash the peace sign while rim running. He takes the, give and go pass from Kevin Durant and just flushes it through. And you're like, God, good Lord. Like, you could be this more dominant version of yourself. And who knows, though, maybe you need the poundage just to be able to kind of throw that around a little bit.
Well, Cavs fans know, like, every team has dreamed on what could be with Andre Drummond.
The Cavs
broke me as a man sometimes.
The Cavs last year were in Minnesota, and the Wolves did not have any healthy centers. Okay?
Is this when Jared Allen was backing up Andre Drummond at this point?
I don't even know if Jared Allen. I don't even remember if Jared Allen was on the Cavs yet. All I remember is that JB Bickerstaff's offensive plan for that game was, I'm gonna throw the ball to Andre Drummond in the post as many times as I possibly can. And guess what? Didn't go well. So it's like every time you're like, yes, we're gonna like maximize this big guy because he shows us stuff. It's like, yes, there's a reason that this doesn't work. There's a reason that like the Pistons were like, we're good that you traded him for a second round pick. But it's like almost but it's almost like I think his role in Brooklyn makes it's like he just sort of like ended up where he probably should have been the whole time.
He's not
to some degree
to be the guy there.
He's making less money, which is unfortunate for him. But basketball-wise, it's a good situation.
He didn't work with the Lakers either, who were necessarily, at the time at least, a contending team.
Yeah.
So I think maybe having this compartmentalized role, I think having a little bit of freedom to be himself helps a lot too. But yeah, just not asking him to be the guy and soon figuring out why he has such gaudy rebounding numbers because he can't finish at the rim. It's interesting to watch from afar. And we'll talk about this maybe in the next segment because of injuries and such, but he could really be an X factor against the Cavs, I think.
And that's what we're going to get into, a little bit of obviously the top level talent that's going to be on display for both teams in this one, expectations around that, injury updates, and then some of the supporting role players and how they could play a factor in this. But as we knew, we're going to talk Andre Drummond in the top segment of this. Before we get into that, though, got to tell you about our friends over at Prize Picks, because as you know, if you're sitting around trying to do some daily fantasy, whatever you're into, you can flip flop it around any which way. But if you want a good daily fantasy option for the NBA, then you need to be checking out the award-winning app Prize Picks. That's because here's what you do. You go ahead and grab yourself 2 to 5 players and an over-under on their projections, and you can win up to 10 times any entry, and it's just you versus the projected numbers. You're not dealing with any of these daily fantasy sharks working the system, scamming you. No, friends, you are right there going up against the board. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. That's how easy it can be. And Prize Picks is, of course, safe and offers fast withdrawals. So when you win that cheddar, you get it in your pocket as quickly as possible. Prize Picks offers any prop that you can think of, from points scored to rebounds, even steals. And Prize Picks doesn't just offer NBA. They also have options for college basketball, college football, NFL, MLB, soccer, MMA, and so much more. For a limited time, you go over to Prize Picks. They'll give you an exclusive no-brainer of an offer for all of our users. You will get $50 for free if any player that you use on your first Prize Picks entry scores a single point. You take Kevin Durant. You could take Kyrie Irving. You could take Andre Drummond if you're so inclined. One single point, you're going to get yourself a $50 free win entry for yourself, but you must use code NBA. That's right. This is an exclusive offer available for Locked On fans. Sign up today and use the code NBA for $50 for free. And if a player in your first Prize Pick entry scores a single point, you win.
Oh, when you're done with that, head on over to betonline.net, your number one source for all your betting and stats info. You go to BetOnline right now. And if you're looking at this playing game, -8.5 for Brooklyn at home. I think the number was somewhere around this last week when they played the Cavs. Eventually did cover that number. Not something the Nets have done a ton of this season, but right now, -400 as well for the Brooklyn Nets over the Cleveland Cavaliers over at betonline.net. BetOnline.net's your best source for sports development, league reviews, news. They have the playoffs, got MLB action rolling, hockey as well, MMA, all the sports got you covered. BetOnline's your continued source for all your sports wagering information, live betting as well. Head on over to betonline.net today. Use your mobile device to learn all the trends and actions. BetOnline, where the game starts.
And where we start talking about this play-in game, the big 7-8 matchup, it's the top talent that'll be on display for both sides. When we don't have to get into the matchup specifics yet, because we always talk about, Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. Well, they get theirs. So the idea of the way in which you want to stop, quote unquote, or limit these guys can be a bit of a minefield. But how do you look at, we'll start with you, Evan. How do you look at the Cleveland Cavaliers and saying, Darius Garland, how can he dominate this game? How can a player like Mobley dominate this game? And then ultimately, we know we're going to talk about some of these injuries, but are there more than those two key figures when you think about top talent on this roster coming into this game that can have a major and significant impact wire to wire?
Yeah, I think when you're just talking in terms of top talent, those are the two pieces of Cleveland's big three that they've kind of built organically over the last 3 years or so. For Darius Garland to kind of make a difference, you have to really see how Brooklyn defended him in that game on Friday. Maybe try and get some of those mismatches. Maybe try and get Bruce Brown off of him a little bit. Make the Nets have to work to defend him, and I think it's going to be a lot of heavy pick and roll. The Cavs have a plethora of bigs that can sometimes set screens, whether it's Markkanen, Mobley, even Moses Brown, who might get minutes as well. Even Ed Davis too, who could maybe even get a cup of coffee in an appearance as well. Like, the Cavs have some weapons and some ability to peel defenders off of Garland so they can kind of get easier shots for him and just kind of create shots for him outside the arc as well. Because if you're Brooklyn, there's a pretty easy strategy to stop the Cavs and stymie them offensively, and it's just cutting off the head of the snake with Garland. I think Milwaukee's shown a good example of it by throwing Jrue Hall at him, just kind of making his life hell for the entire game. The Heat did it with Jimmy Butler and Kyle Lowry. If you're the Nets, you try and slow him down, and then in turn, you kind of slow down Evan Mobley too, because he has a lot of unlimited offensive potential, Mobley does, but he's a little limited as well right now because he can't create his own shot. He's relying on Garland to kind of find these easy opportunities, whether they're lobs or in pick and rolls or just post-ups or even just shots in isolation or things like that. And I think if you're the Nets, maybe you kind of just wall him off a little bit and make him uncomfortable because you don't have that vertical threat that Jarrett Allen provides at the rim in terms of pick and roll and lobs to kind of give him easier looks as well. So I think not having Allen makes it a little easier to defend the Cavs, who are a very vanilla team at times offensively to begin with. But if you want to get those two involved, I think you just have to kind of find a way to keep Garland moving and kind of keep him open and give him plenty of easy looks and opportunities.
Before we talk about defending them, and we'll go to Chris around Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. Doug, we watched that game, the last game for the Brooklyn Nets, the career high in assists for Kevin Durant. Do you think that this is a game where Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving come out and say, hey, it's gun blazing? We've talked before about how they kind of take turns about who's going to be the dominant scoring force. Or can Kevin Durant in a game like this afford to approach it the same way and say, listen, the attention's going to be on me, and I'm going to be able to have Kyrie play off ball, and he can execute, and I can also get the likes of Bruce Brown and obviously Seth Curry and Nicholas Claxton, that connection that we've talked about, get them involved first and kind of worry about when I need to put my foot on the gas if it's required.
Yeah, we have a pretty good proxy just because they played, 3 days ago or whatever, to see how the Cavs at least planned to kind of try to hold up on Kevin Durant. It didn't really work at all. Like, they used Markkanen a lot on him. He had like #no chance against against Durant in those one-on-one matchups. Specifically, Durant just completely roasted, eyes lit up, roasted him when that was sort of like a half-court matchup that Markkanen got assigned. And these guys know, like, the Cavs are a really nice team. And in some ways that they're similar here because they just don't have, like, I would call like a great wing defender among the same size that can, and most teams don't for a guy like Durant. So it's not like, not like any team really has this, but you can have guys that are a little further along on the spectrum. Right. And so and that's where, frankly, I'll be honest with you, the Nets really don't have this player either. This is why they need Simmons really bad. But, we kind of saw what happened in this last game where it's like, if you're going to be able to get KD to his spots pretty easily, which he was able to do not too long ago against the team, then he was ultra efficient, 11 for 20, got to the line 10 times, which even for him is a decent amount. Like, he was just a real problem, and even more of a problem for Cavs in some ways than he has been for other teams. So I don't think it's a one or the other. I don't think he needs to operate in a get everyone else involved first if it's just going to be easy like it was last game. But it is good to know that he has the other piece in his bag, like Adam and I have talked about a bunch, where the offensive facilitation has been of a much different ilk lately for him around the assists and just getting other guys involved, slip passes and whatnot. So I guess I'm just like not as concerned, but I might be also just looking a little too short term in the one game sample size that happened recently where it was just very easy for him.
Chris, who's the guy that you haven't been talking about in the Cavs all year that's the clear-cut automatic Kevin Durant stopper? We all know a team. Everybody has one. They just don't use them until they really need it.
Well, he tore his meniscus, but Dean Wade, my guy, would have been the answer. Actually, here's the thing. The Cavs, what we're gonna, I can pretty much. They did this the other day, and it's what makes sense. They're gonna put Okoro on Kyrie, and they're gonna Okoro's gonna chase around Kyrie, and that makes sense. I think Dragic being healthy for this game adds another wrinkle to this. That's gonna put a lot of pressure on Garland to defend. It's gonna put pressure on Karis LeVert to defend. I think they're gonna put Mobley at the 5 against Drummond, and I think that's gonna leave Lauri Markkanen on KD. And I think we've seen this dating back to a recent Cavs-Lakers game. Lauri Markkanen Lauri Markkanen had success as a defender this year as a 3 when Jared Allen and Evan Mobley are backing him up. And what they will do is say, okay, you're going to screen me. You're going to try to attack me in a pick and roll. You're going to attack me in whatever. Evan Mobley's going to switch on you. Have fun with that. Have fun with Jared Allen switching on you. When you take away that one layer, even that one layer, Markkanen becomes so easy, I think, to pick on. And it wouldn't surprise me if KD just comes out gun blazing, drops 40, and it's not like he is the engine of everything for Brooklyn, because Markkanen is big. He will do his best, whatever. He just there's no one in the world that can really guard KD, really, right? That's the Cavs know that. They saw him in the finals with the Warriors when he hit some just insane shots just pulling up, but Markkanen's gonna have a massive problem, and I wonder. I would wonder if, and they haven't done a lot of this year, but if there's ever a time for JB to try something crazy just to see it, if it's more of the zone they run with Mobley at the top of the key, if it's trying Mobley on Durant and saying, Lowry, just box out Andre Drummond. You're 7 foot and 240 pounds. You should be able to do this somewhat. I wonder if you see some of those wrinkles just to try to throw a different look at KD first.
And I'm glad you mentioned that too, because that is actually one problem amongst some problems here. But where the Nets offense have stagnated the most at times this season is when other teams just go only zone. For some reason, the Nets have really struggled.
Well, if you're KD and Kyrie and you have 3-point shots staring you in the face, and you're like, yes, I am one of the whatever you think of yourself. KD thinks he's probably the best player. Kyrie probably also thinks he's the best player in the world. You probably stare at those shots and are like, yes, I'm just going to take those. And if you're the opposing defense, you're kind of cool with that, because it's different than KD getting to the rim or Kyrie doing Kyrie stuff and getting to the rim.
That's the one area where limited defensive personnel has been able to sort of at least speed bump the Nets offense because they end up stagnating too much into this ISO stuff, and it just looks like everyone is treading water for a long periods of time. So I wouldn't be shocked if the Cavs did employ that, because the Pacers just did it. I mean, almost every team has done it. It's just how long they can stay committed to it. That's really more of the question. But every team has tried it.
Mobley maybe allows them to do that, because you will just see him planted at the top of the key in a 3-2, and he's long as hell. He sets the tone of that. The whole zone is built around him being able to be 3 places at once, seemingly, because he's so long and covers so much space. So
that and Bickerstaff likes to use a box and one that the Wolves use with Kevin Garnett, as a bit of a throwback. And I don't think they'll use that without Allen out there. But to Chris's point, Mobley's the linchpin for the Cavs defensively.
And especially with the lack of, obviously, Jared Allen being out there as well. Get into, I want to ask one more question on Garland specifically, but then some of the role players here, because I think this is where, for a team in the Brooklyn Nets that aren't necessarily, they are high level deep, but they are not second level deep. So talking about some of those guys like Seth Curry, what Cleveland could try to do, how much they'll try to pick their poison with them. And then again, this piece on Garland, I just wonder about how high his motor can run throughout this entire game. But before we do, let me tell our friends over at rockauto.com. Good Lord. I asked Doug this question all the time. I'm going to bring in the entire panel. Chris, how many car parts do you think there are in a vehicle?
A lot, just a ton. Some that I don't even know exist.
Exactly. And Doug says 10. I say it's at least 100, maybe even the thousands. The bottom line is you go over to rockauto.com, you save yourself time and money when you're using Rock Auto. Why choose to spend 30, 50, or even 100 times more for the same parts from a chain store or a car dealership? You go into the auto parts store, you say you need a headlamp for your car. They go back, they knock the dust off, give it to you, they supercharge you, and you say, maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong. You have a computer, you can look it up, and you can guarantee you're getting the right part for your car, make, and model. Rock Auto is a family business, and it's doing service for those do-it-yourselfers like you and me and Chris and Evan and Doug. We all know we're out there tinkering around as much as we would like. You head over there, of course, and you can go ahead and use their easy-to-use drop-down menu to find the make and model of your vehicle and the parts that you need. Go to rockauto.com right now to see all the parts available for your car or truck. You write Locked On. They're How Did You Hear About Us box so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. RockAuto.com. So the quick follow up just on Garland, can he go full 48? Can he continue to get his looks? Can he get his shots? Because if the Cavs are going to, as we'll talk a little bit of prediction here and also discuss the injuries around both of these teams and the benefits for Brooklyn, but can Garland just go and get his for a full 48? Because if he's not doing that, then I think we already start to downgrade what is the Brooklyn Nets -8 opportunity.
If Darius Garland doesn't play well, the Cavs have no chance in hell. And I think Garland is a top
dark fast.
Like you're going to be seeing Rajon Rondo having to initiate the offense.
You're going to watch Rajon Rondo try and bowl the ball down the court.
They're gonna like post up Lauri Markkanen, and I will be like, that's never worked. That's never worked ever. Why are you doing this? I don't understand this.
Chris's dad has a funnier assessment.
Not safe for the pod. He was out from day one. Shouts to my father. But if Garland's like somewhere between like a top 10 and 17-ish player in the East, like he's that good now. But they've asked so much of him this year, and like this is one of those games you're gonna ask the world of him again, and like he has to coax every bit of value, not just of himself, but out of Mobley, out of Markkanen, out of Okoro. Like it's asking a lot of him, and if he doesn't play really, really, really well, I don't know how they win this game, to be honest with you.
Doug, will the Nets stay at home when we talk about how they'll approach it as far as who they want to take on Garland defensively? Or is it just about, hey, we'll play our game, we'll live with the results, or do they want to take away the number one option for Cleveland?
I got to be honest with you. I was going back through this box score after, and I would have sworn that Darius Garland hit way more 3-pointers in this game. It was only 3 for 6. It felt like 10 for 11 and maybe that's just me being sort of ruined by what other teams seem to do against the Nets, which is hit big shots in moments. And I think that's just a little too much fandom in me. I think there's no secret as to why Bruce Brown played 40 minutes the last time these two matched up. Bruce Brown's been very, very good. He's been very, very good lately, and he's earned every single bit of playing time, especially being able to, hit threes and whatnot. But I think the 40 minutes here was specifically because he's the one sort of point of attack defender that can just go out there, because they just have the Cavs engine just runs just directly through this guy. And so if you just know that's what's going to be the case, then you just have to keep a guy like Bruce Brown out there for as long as stretches as possible, because he's your best opportunity to stop him. So I think you'll continue to see that piece. Like with guys like Garland, you really are only hoping, and we say this with Durant and Kyrie all the time too, you're really only hoping to slow them down. Like it's going to be impossible to fully stop them. Especially because Darius gets to the rim so well, and he's just so dynamic and just so sort of singular in the way that he scores, which is why the Cavs are really still very good. But I think we'll see a ton of minutes from Bruce Brown. I think they really actually can't afford to take him off the court for too long with Darius out there. So I wouldn't be shocked if we even saw him run like 42 to 44 minutes or as many minutes as Garland was out there, because I think they're going to need to. So I think that's generally probably going to end up being the plan. It's not a super high level thought around defensive schemes, but they just have this one guy, and Bruce Brown, for what he is a super disruptive defensive player.
The other one thing I will just say about Garland is that Allen, Mobley is maybe like arguably already better than Allen. He's that good. The one thing he's definitely not. I said arguably, Evan. Relax. Okay. You know this isn't a new take, buddy. You talk to me every day. Come on. Mobley is not at the level of Allen as a lob threat. So much of the Cavs' success this year with Garland getting downhill was Jared Allen's really tall and will dunk anything that he can get his hands on. And Mobley doesn't quite have that in him yet. He will have some. And like Drummond is a guy that I think if you pick on him a little bit, I would like to, if you pressure on that pressure point a little bit, I would maybe want to see what you could do with that. But the Cavs offense doesn't have the same finishing kind of go-to thing. Like, they've never quite found something they can just lean on when they need a bucket. Like, the Nets have KD, they have Kyrie. They can just go through those guys, run ISO, run a pick and roll, and it's fine. They'll do that with Garland. They'll try to do some stuff with Kevin Love. But they don't have that two-man action that they really had with, I don't think at least, that they had with Garland and Allen. It's not the same with Garland and Mobley. It's effective. It's just not nearly as efficient as they had when Allen was just crushing dunks on everyone's head.
Oh, Allen, the fro with the kung fu headband. It's just, we miss it. We miss, even now you miss it. Sometimes even more, because you realize the thing that the Nets lack would be a player like Jared Allen. But Evan, is automatically when you look at the Nets after Kevin Durant, after Kyrie Irving, do you automatically go to the perimeter sharpshooting of Seth Curry as being the thing that you want to try to mitigate? Do you look at, as Doug and I have been getting more and more excited about, Nicholas Claxton and what he's been able to produce on the offensive end in tandem with Kevin Durant? We know Brooklyn, it was to highlight these injury updates, Brooklyn's going to be having Goran Dragic available for them. So let's get more. The Cavs, unfortunately, have to work with less. Is there a secondary thing that the Cavs want to accomplish after dealing with whatever the results are with Kyrie and Kevin Durant?
So that's the interesting thing. Seth Curry is a huge threat for the Cavs. Maybe you throw Isaac Okoro at him, or you try to use Lamar Stevens in some way to just kind of defend him a little bit. Lamar Stevens could be a factor in this game as well. We should have probably talked. Chris and I should probably mention him a little bit more, but it's that Nicholas Claxton provides a lot of rim pressure, so that's going to be a test for Evan Mobley as well. And yes, he is a very stalwart and adamant defender, but advanced metrics tend to say that without Jared Allen on the floor, he does sometimes get picked on just because the Cavs in general are getting shredded defensively, and you're asking him to do much more than you probably did all season long. And then even like you guys mentioned Bruce Brown. Bruce Brown's a stud, and I think he can do a lot of things to disrupt Darius Garland and make him uncomfortable. And like you guys said, him as a three-point threat is just really interesting too, just to watch his game kind of evolve and grow like it is. And I'm intrigued to see what these Nets role players do, and you guys kind of hit the nail on the head a little bit, though, in terms of the Cavs. And Lauri Markkanen is probably going to get bullied in this game quite a bit. The Lakers did it with LeBron. Go all the way back to the opening day, the game of the season for the Cavs. You watched Ja Morant and Desmond Bane take turns bullying Lauri Markkanen in isolation, just kind of forcing him on in switches. And again, there's only so much the Cavs can do to kind of mitigate that. I think having Allen and Mobley on the floor together made it a hell of a lot easier in terms of penetration. I think having Isaac Okoro is just like a little bit of a safety valve and switches helps too. But it's going to be tough. I think it's definitely going to be tough. And I think the Nets have a lot of interesting role players. And also the Dragic factor, that's huge. The Cavs don't have any scouting against him just based on Friday's game. They're just to say, like, okay, this is what Dragic did to kill us. What can we do to slow that down? He's a little bit of a variable here. And again, Andre Drummond could be an X factor. Like, I'm not saying that just like tongue in cheek. Like, I think he could be a problem for Evan Mobley at times.
Well, it's so funny too, Doug, because you and I, coming into this game, it was the expectation of, well, if Jared Allen plays, then all of a sudden it flips this hierarchy of where the Nets could get into trouble with Nicholas Claxton. Then you talk about Andre Drummond. Then you say, well, they have multiple big bodies. If they start to get into foul trouble, now the Nets have to play a little bit smaller, and you could see this advantage shift a little bit, at least in a positional value towards Cleveland. But without Jared Allen, that thing that's right on like the razor's edge of being a potential difficulty for the Nets becomes a strength. And then that becomes, I think, the spider web effect of now that's a bit of a strength. Now all the perimeter shooting becomes a strength. Now when you bring in Patty Mills, all of a sudden that looks a little bit better and brighter because you can bring those kind of waves. Is there any, I don't want to put this way as we get into predictions here, but is there any last thing that you look at for Cleveland, Doug, from the Nets perspective and say, oh, if they start to get if obviously Kevin Love goes off for 40, that's going to be a concern, right? If he dials back that salt and pepper and just really gets downhill.
Yeah, I mean, look, these guys got the Nets into foul trouble last game. Drummond had 4 fouls, Claxton had 4 fouls, and 4 fouls in almost no time at all. Like the Cavs, at least the way Garland especially pressures, and Love he doesn't pressure, but just that fact that he can mismatch you on the outside. Like the fouls ended up becoming something of a problem. This is one of the few games Andre Drummond was actually able to close, mostly because they were moving downhill at that point, and his size ended up being something of a strength rather than a weakness, like it sometimes is. But I think fouls are still a problem. Kyrie had 4 fouls in this one too. Like, you still have to worry about that piece. I do think that they can probably, with the names that were just dropped before, like Dragic, like Curry, like they can probably in the end just out offense everything. And then worst case scenario, you go to like KD at the 5, like they've seen that. That's a devastating lineup for the Nets at times. So I guess I don't want to be lackadaisical because one game anything can happen. But if just speaking in a non-vacuum, like going into this game, the Nets, basically the way this is shaping up, just kind of like have to win this game, right? Like they just by
of a massive disappointment were they
by the nature of just the line and the talent and just the way things have set up here. And maybe if Jared Allen was here, I'd be a little bit more like worried / it gets a little closer. But in the end, like this is just a game the Nets absolutely have to win. And maybe I'm speaking out of turn here, and you guys can tell me wrong. Like, it would be a massive disappointment to lose this game. To have to play another playing game after this one, like for the Nets, I would call it a disaster. And it's one game and anything can happen.
And Chris, respond to that, but then frame it as also, because it doesn't seem like from our general conversation, we would get a lot of pushback that the Nets should probably win this game. But how do you feel about Cleveland coming out of this one and still having another opportunity, right? Just to get on a positive note, can they turn around and look at the 9th and 10th seed in Charlotte and look at Atlanta and say, hey, we have every opportunity to beat one of those teams, though, and still be in the playoffs? I think that can get forgotten here when we're talking about the play-in scenario. The Cavs can still make the playoffs coming out of this.
Before Chris answers, I just want to say, hold on, Chris, one second, because I want to say one thing. I'm going to correct myself here.
This is what
I'm going to check myself because I realized I just did the exact thing I cautioned all Nets fans of not doing.
I was about
all Nets fans
going to call you out for it.
But sorry, it could take 10 seconds. All Nets fans have already penciled them in about playing Boston in the first round because of that, and I feel dangerously close to just doing that. So I'm going to walk this back 2 seconds and just say I will feel a lot of disappointment if they lose. And it is not a foregone conclusion that they win. So anyway, I just want to clarify that because I stepped on the exact thing that I screamed about yesterday on the podcast.
It is like, I think one game sample, anything can happen. Like, I mean, who knows? Like, injury happens in the first 5 minutes and like things go off the rails. Like,
Jesus, what the hell's your problem, Chris?
Look, I watch
family show, for crying out loud. Threatening injury.
Look, I watched that Nets Bucks series last year, and it was literally not to bring up bad memories, but it was like a toe difference that. Yeah. Like these little mini small things.
Chris, you really have gone somewhere else with that, saying like, I have family from New York. They threaten to kneecap people all the time, or something like that. I don't know.
Nah, the Norwegians that live in New York, my family they're just kind people who want people to have healthcare. Look, I think the Nets the line feels right to me, right? Like I think the Nets with KD, with Kyrie, with that pedigree. I mean, like the Cleveland fans know better than anyone what Kyrie can do in a big moment and how capable he is in big spots. And KD, they know KD too because he hit maybe the coldest shot I've ever seen live in the 2018 finals when he stuck a three in LeBron's face to win a game. And it like those guys are at their apex, right? And the Cavs are on the come up here theoretically. But I do think it gives you some solace that if you're Cleveland, you do have a chance to go home. I think more importantly, go home and play one of these other teams with an extra day of rest. Like that will give you some advantage. Even if it doesn't seem like Jarrett's going to play and all of that, you have something you can turn to as you kind of move forward from if you lose this game. I think what you're hoping for is it's more like quarters 2 and 3 of that game we just saw than 1 and 4, because that was where that game was competitive. The Cavs looked composed. They kind of took it to Brooklyn a little bit, and then KD did KD stuff in the fourth, and it didn't matter. But you're hoping for some in between of those extremes. I think that game felt like to me if you're Cleveland.
Evan, closing thoughts, takeaways, suggestions?
No, I agree with what Chris is saying 100%. I just said, like, in terms of the lines, I think I agree with the line. But a crazy number for me is you guys asked about how many parts are in a car. There are approximately 30,000 parts in a car. That's why you heard me go, oh my gosh. But
my joke was always with that it's more than 10, less than 5,000, and I thought 5,000 was way high.
I thought it was in the 5,000s or so as well. But I agree.
Blinker. I don't know. After that,
but I agree with Chris's assessment, and I think if you're the Cavs, you go in, try and be competitive because, like Chris said, in the second and third quarter, the Cavs did not seem like they were overrun by the moment. And then, again, Kevin Durant kind of flipped the switch in the fourth and just absolutely killed them. And the Nets beat them despite Kyrie being incredibly inefficient in that game. And maybe if you're able to slow things down, maybe you make one of those two uncomfortable, you have a little bit better of a puncher's chance. But it's going to be tough when you're missing one of your key pieces on the defensive side of the ball for the Cavs.
Yes, sir. We'll see what happens as it shakes out later tonight when you're hearing this on Tuesday morning. The Brooklyn Nets hosting the Cleveland Cavaliers in the 7-8 play-in game for the honor of going to the playoffs and seeing if you have to play one more to try to get the job done. Chris and Evan locked on Cavs, doing the thing just like we are every single day for you, giving it all that in-depth coverage. Doug's here. I'm here as well. Locked on Nets. You can check us out on YouTube, get us on your feeds wherever you subscribe to podcasts, and we'll see. It'll come out all in the wash, but unfortunately, there's no animosity here. We're all underneath the same Locked On umbrella. Good conversation, fellas. Really appreciate it.
Always, guys. Thank you.